Une demi-grenadelle. Je n'attendrai pas la vague de trop.
Bad news. You've been lied to. You've been lied to 3 times. Lie number 1, modern cars just can't be lightweight. Well, we put this thing on a scale with a full tank of gas and it came back at 2,493 pounds, which is in fact light. Lie number 2, this is a modern Lotus Elise. No, it's 21 inches longer than a Lotus Elise. It's about the same size as a Porsche 718 and is closer in philosophy to a McLaren. So think of it as a Fisher-Price My First McLaren, except that Fisher-Price is in French, so that would be Le My First McLaren. Which brings me to lie number 3, which is that French cars suck. Well, they absolutely do not. And cette voiture ici, c'est incroyable, which is French for your mom says hi. And you've been lied to 4 times. But that is the Alpine A110, and it's named after the Alpine A110, itself a descendant of a deity named Légèreté. Indeed, that is the mythical French goddess of lightweight. 5 times. If you drive your cars on the road, it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when something will happen. Hagerty's guaranteed value insurance lets you agree on your classic car's value before something happens, not when it's already too late. So your car can get back out on the road where it belongs. Get a free quote at jasonsentme.com. First things first, what is Alpine? Well, here's what it's not. It's not Alpine because that's a Sunbeam. It's not Alpina because that's a BMW. It is Renault's racing division. Renault was formed in 1899 as the Renault Brothers Company. And the brothers knew that success in racing was the best way to prove the mettle of their products and thus increase sales. And so race they did. However, in 1903, one of the brothers, Marcel, was killed in an accident while racing. Eventually, the remaining brother decided to stop racing and instead concentrate on building cars for regular old folks. In other words, a French Volkswagen. Actually, it literally was a French Volkswagen. Renault had been shown plans for Porsche's KDF wagon for a number of reasons, and Renault started working on a similar car. It eventually made it into production in 1947 as the 4 chevaux, or 4CV, with unmistakable similarities to the Volkswagen, including and especially its rear engine mounting location, swing arm suspension in the back, and separate floor pan and body. Remember that floor pan thing? Meanwhile, a French Renault dealership in the town of Dieppe was damaged during the war. In 1946, its owner, Émile Rédélé, handed it over to his son to manage, and at 24 years old, Jean Rédélé became the youngest Renault dealer in the country. A few years later, the young Rédélé's business was doing well, and for fun, he started participating in road rallies. In 1950, he won the local Rallye du Dieppe. The next year, he drove in the Rally Monte Carlo. And the year after that, he won the Sport 750 class at the Mille Miglia, finishing 17th overall in a tiny little car with a little engine. Rédélé was a bit of a showman, too. He would often finish these multi-day rallies perfectly clean-shaven in a pressed, immaculate suit. And it wasn't because the Renaults was so easy to drive or so much cleaner. It was because he was so much faster than the second-place finisher that he had time to get a hotel room, shower, shave, change, and hop into the car in time to win. These successes obviously did not go unnoticed by Renault, which started to officially support him. Before long, he had developed his own 5-speed manual to replace the factory 3-speed transmission. But that was not enough for Rédélé. He wanted to build his own car. And so he hired now famed Giovanni Michelotti to design a beautiful coupe body that could be made of fiberglass and bolted straight to the 4CV's floor pan. This new car would be sold under the brand named Alpine, which Rédélé chose, in his own words, for my preference for driving in the Alps. This choice was certainly also inspired by Rédélé's many wins at the Alpine Rally. Or should I call it the Alpine Rally? Yeah. Anyway, the A106's name came from the series of 4CV upon which it was based, the 1060 series, just without the final number. And it was almost as small as its engine, a 747cc, 21 horsepower inline 4. It was replaced by the A108 when the 1080 series Dauphine replaced the 4CV. A couple hundred each of the A106 and A108 were produced before the A110 came along with larger engines and a switch to a Lotus-style tubular backbone chassis that Alpine had designed for itself. The A110 made its debut at the 1962 Paris Auto Show, pulling off the incredibly rare feat of being both pretty and tiny. Its perfect proportions masked how little it was, fooling everyone into thinking it was a normal-sized car, until they turned around and tripped over one. Production began in 1963, and the A110 weighed under 1,400 pounds, so few pounds that it was anything but slow, and that was before the original model's 50 horsepower ballooned into a monstrous 140. Over time, the engines, which were always Renault-based, grew all the way from under a liter to 1.6. In 1968, Renault began to officially distribute the Alpine brand through their dealerships, knowing that if the cars failed in races, the public would blame Alpine. But if they succeeded, it made Renault look great. And it definitely succeeded. In 1971, the A110 won the Monte Carlo Rally outright, sweeping more than just the podium by finishing first, second, third, and fourth. 2 years later, Alpine repeated that success with a 1-2-3-5 finish, and it went on to an overall win of the first ever season of the World Rally Championship. Despite the victories, the little Alpines were barely known outside of France, especially the road-going versions. But anytime any English-speaking journalist got behind the wheel of one, well, the reviews were so positive that if that happened today, we'd just assume they were written by a paid influencer. Saying things like, "If anybody has ever had more fun on wheels, I would like to know how he did it." And, "I have never driven a car that cornered better than an Alpine." The little four-cylinders used push rods, and yet almost every road tester commented they were so willing to rev that they needed to keep one eye on the tachometer to avoid going over the recommended max, which was 7,500 RPM. And a couple of them admitted to kissing 8,000 without any problems. This at a time when most push-rod engines could barely make it to 5,000. The big motored variants could hit 60 miles an hour in a ludicrous 6 seconds and change, and could manage over 130 miles an hour, and yet the real magic was in the handling. Quote, "The road holding is so outstanding that it is difficult to explain how it has been brought about. Rear engines and swing axles are not fashionable, yet the fantastic speed of this car through the corners defies all rational explanation. If desired, the rear end..." The rear end can be hung out to great angle, yet the sudden uncontrollable breakaway of the typical rear-engined car never takes place. And all of this was done with a ride quality universally praised for being supple, and an interior that was so finely finished it was free of squeaks and rattles. Indeed, Alpine seems to have been born from Jean Rédélé's ability to add elegance to the filthy and rugged world of racing. The A110 was a tailored suit in a sea of oversized, filthy coveralls. Take that, asshole. A financially troubled Alpine was taken over by Renault in 1975, and the A110's rally career ended suddenly upon the arrival of the world's first purpose-built rally car, the Lancia Stratos. Production ended in 1977 after 14 years, with some 10,000 A110s produced. But the line didn't end there. Its successor was the A310, first shown in 1971, which used a similar backbone frame. It was succeeded and updated with turbocharged power as the GTA, which then became the A610. The A610 was killed off in 1995, taking with it the entire Alpine brand and ending a 40-year run. In 2007, Renault announced that Alpine would be back for 2010 with a Miata competitor. And the rumors had it, it was based on a shrunken down version of the Nissan 350Z's rear-wheel drive platform. Well, that never happened. In 2012, Renault signed a partnership with British Caterham to build a platform for a mid-engine sports car that also never happened. But Renault kept their foot in it, and in 2017, the world got the Alpine A110. The new Alpine doesn't have a single Renault badge on it, and this new car didn't just share its name with the original, but nearly all of its styling cues. Not a caricature of the original like, for example, the new Beetle or Mini Cooper. This car was chock full of styling references from the original, both in the shape and the details. The driving lights, the hood ridge, the side scallops, vestigial engine cooling vents. The big functional change in the new A110 is that its engine is mounted transversely and in front of the rear wheels, rather than longitudinally and behind them. It's a Nissan-sourced 1.8-liter MR series four-cylinder, similar to the engine used in the US market Sentra in the mid-2010s, just with a turbocharger and an intercooler. The Alpine lightweight philosophy is present and accounted for. The chassis of this car is unique, and it's 96% aluminum. The suspension is double wishbone, the steering is electrically assisted, and the transmission is a 7-speed dual clutch that I'll call a PDG, because it's pretty damn good. And that doesn't absolve anyone of the war crime of not offering a manual. In its layout, the A110 is closest to a Lotus Elise or an Alfa Romeo 4C, though it's way bigger and more usable as a real car than either of them. It's actually closer in size to a Toyota GR86, and so it's got some daily driver practicality in the form of a frunk and a trunk, both of which are admittedly tiny. The doors open wide and there is no sill in the way to make getting in difficult. And once you're in, French angels sing. The seats are incredibly comfortable, soft, well bolstered, and there's enough headroom to wear an extraordinary chapeau. The shift pedals are enormous, and they're metal, and they're mounted to the column as God intended. The pedals are directly in front of you, which is a hell of an accomplishment for a small mid-engine car. And it's a big long reach to those pedals, so the driving position feels more than anything else like a McLaren. And something else that would feel familiar to a McLaren driver is the wooden brake pedal. And the suspension tuning, because this car is incredibly soft and compliant. It will not bottom out over anything. The suspension tuning is magnificent. And the similarities to McLaren continue. It also sounds just like a McLaren inside the car, though it doesn't steer like one. This is very sensitive to side winds. In fact, it's very difficult to keep the A110 in its lane on a highway on a windy day. But that instability gives it a playfulness when you're on the back roads, and the steering then comes alive, screaming tender nothings right to your fingertips. The engine similarly screams at you through that intake resonance tube, which sends real induction noise directly to your right ear. It's not the most multi-dimensional sound, but in a world of fake engine noise, it's nice to hear something real. Plus, it's a throwback to the original A110, which has a vent in the firewall for exactly that same purpose. See? I clocked a 4.3 second 0 to 60 on this car. And this is just the base 250 horsepower A110. Other variants make as much as 300 and are even quicker. But 12.9 seconds through the quarter mile puts this right on top of not only an Alfa Romeo 4C, but also a Porsche 718 Cayman T, which, by the way, weighs 571 pounds more. How do you say moo in French? Légèreté. And speaking of Porsche, the Alpine's pricing relative to a Cayman is probably the A110's biggest Achilles heel. Its price in other markets is about 20% more expensive than a base 300 horsepower Cayman. That's a hard sell, rationally, but the fact is the Alpine is a far more interesting choice. And the price isn't relevant to us in the US anyway because we can't buy one of these cars. Renault did promise on several occasions that the A110 would come to America, But it never did, and now never will. This car's replacement was to be a joint partnership between Renault and Lotus, and yet that collab has been killed off as well. Renault says the A110's replacement will be all electric, will come here, and will be lighter than traditional combustion engine sports cars. But if there's one word that describes the car industry these days, it's uncertainté. Here's something that is certain. You should be saving your pennies now, because when these cars turn 25 years old and are eligible for import into the US, you're going to want one. They're proof that modern cars can be lightweight, and more importantly, that they can be charming, even if, or maybe because, they're French.